My 13-year-old son was sniffing intensely and twisting his head around the area where he stood. Slightly worried that something was wrong, I asked what he was doing. He replied, "I farted. I'm trying to sniff it all up so you don't have to smell it." He's a well-meaning fool. One afternoon after school, my brother and I met up with our dad, who worked there along with the janitor, as we all headed to the parking lot. As we walked past the elementary building, the janitor sighed heavily, grumbling about some kid writing their name on the wall. My dad glanced over and remarked, "It's the same name as my son, but at least his name is spelled differently since it has a C in it." Cue dramatic gasp. My brother exclaimed, "I forgot the C!" Let's just say, he wasn't the brightest bulb in the box. Whenever one of my daughters tries to call the other ugly to insult her, I can't help but laugh. They're identical twins. During his teenage years, my son spent 18 months telling everyone he was born in Brazil. In reality, he was born in Bristol. While on a train, my 14-year-old son was gazing out the window and asked, "Mom, what are those plants?" I replied, "Those are potato plants." He continued, "Fries come from potatoes, right?" I said, "Yes, of course." "You know that. We've even made fries ourselves. Don't you remember?" He then declared, "They should plant fries instead. Nobody likes potatoes." The look on his face screamed, "I've just revolutionized the world. Bow before your genius, son." I simply closed my eyes and prayed silently. He's now a successful site engineer. Thankfully, his wife handles everything outside of work. She's an absolute blessing, and I strive to be the best mother-in-law so she'll never leave him. My teenage daughter was notoriously messy and constantly needed reminders to clean her room. She often left dirty dishes, especially juice-filled sports bottles, to pile up on her nightstand. We repeatedly warned her not to let the bottles sit, as the juice could ferment. One day, while my husband and I were in our room, we heard a loud explosion, followed by her scream. Rushing to her room, we discovered that one of her juice bottles had finally succumbed to the pressure of fermentation and exploded. The blast was so strong, the cap pierced her ceiling, and shards of the bottle were scattered everywhere. And yet, she's my clever one. When my son was 11, he confidently informed me he likely knew everything there was to know. His reasoning? He tried thinking of something he didn't know and couldn't come up with anything. During the Peter Pan peanut butter recall about a decade ago, my then 15-year-old daughter came home from school. As she passed the living room, she paused to watch a news report about the Salmonella outbreak. With a sudden aha moment, she exclaimed, "Oh, I get it now. It's about peanut butter." All day at school, I thought people were saying Peter Pan was going around killing people, and I couldn't figure out why he'd become a villain. I stared at her, waiting for her to laugh and say it was a joke. Instead, she casually went to her room, as though this was an everyday conversation. My 3-year-old was getting ready for his bath. I noticed his underwear looked odd, but I was too distracted by his brother to think much of it. Then he took off one pair of underwear, followed by a second, and then a third. I asked him why he was wearing 3 pairs. He gave me a look of disbelief and said, "Mom told me to put on a clean pair every day." That literal-minded child grew up to win the top math competition in our large Midwestern city. Even in his 20s, though, you have to be crystal clear when giving him instructions. He'll follow them to the letter. After I told my child that eating carrots helps you see in the dark, he went down to the basement with a carrot in hand, waving it around as though it were a flashlight. I always told my kids not to take their shoes and socks off during car rides, especially for short trips, so we wouldn't waste time finding and putting them back on before heading into the store. Picture a single father with two small children running around the car, struggling to re-shoe them in the middle of a scorching Arizona summer. Gross. One day, we arrived at the store, and my daughter's shoe was nowhere to be found. I asked her what happened, and she said, "Daddy, I didn't want you to get mad because my shoe was off, so I threw it out the window." That logic made perfect sense to her 5-year-old brain. One day, my son came over to visit us, though he didn't live with us. We weren't home at the time, but since we were on our way back, he let himself in. When we got home, he was in a panic, convinced he had somehow broken our newly adopted cat. Confused, I asked him what was wrong because she seemed perfectly fine to me. He explained that she was vibrating while sitting on his lap. That's the moment he discovered what purring was. He hadn't been around many cats before, so he had no idea. I was the clueless child in this story. When I was about 3, after finishing dinner, my mom would leave me alone in the kitchen. I would always sneak around looking for M&Ms, knowing I wasn't supposed to eat them. Every time I finished my secret snack, I would go to my mom and ask, "Did you hear me eating M&Ms in the kitchen?" She would always say yes, and I would get upset because I had tried to be as quiet as possible. It wasn't until I got older that I realized I was giving myself away by asking her. When my oldest child was 11, he stayed up late with me and my roommate. At the time, I was still a messy bachelor from my first marriage and hadn't yet met my wife. We were watching The Colbert Report, and Stephen Colbert made a joke about something in Congress being as likely as writing legislation with Santa Claus, the Tooth Fairy, or the Easter Bunny. I chuckled absent-mindedly at the joke, but my son sat up and asked, "Wait, Dad, what did he just say? Can you explain that?" Thinking he was confused about the political context, I explained that 2 politicians didn't get along. He nodded but asked, "Okay, but what else did he say?" At this point, my roommate, who had been focused on his laptop, began watching us closely. I said, "It's as unlikely as meeting Santa Claus." "Yeah?" "Or the Tooth Fairy." "Yeah?" "Or the Easter Bunny." "What?" My roommate chuckled while I stared at my son, stunned. I finally asked, "Buddy, did you still think there was a rabbit sneaking into houses to hide eggs?" He sank into the couch, looking embarrassed and upset. He later explained that while he had figured out Santa Claus was just the parents a few years earlier, he thought the Easter Bunny had simply stopped visiting him because he had grown too old. When my youngest son was 10, he went to the pediatrician for an ear check. The doctor discovered a foreign object lodged in his left ear. That object turned out to be a dead housefly. My son had caught it alive a week earlier and stuck it in his ear, believing it would give him the ability to fly. My son came home from his sex education class feeling disappointed. He had expected to be taught some moves. My father worked as a truck driver, so I often acted as the male role model for my younger sister. One day, when she was about 14, I took her to McDonald's for dinner. When I asked what she wanted, she said she wanted McNuggets. At the speaker, I ordered an 8-piece McNuggets with a high C. She interrupted, reminding me to say, "No onions." I added, "A quarter-pounder meal with a Sprite." And again, she insisted, "No onions." When the cashier asked if the order was complete, she yelled again, "No onions." I calmly confirmed the order and drove forward. Frustrated, she asked, "Why didn't you tell them no onions on mine?" I loudly replied, "On your chicken nuggets?" It finally dawned on her, and when I jokingly asked the cashier at the window to make sure there were no onions on her McNuggets, she was too embarrassed to look up.